Well, thanks very much, Melinda, and to my colleagues, to Kelly, to Michael. I think might have had to go to party room this morning, but I know he'll be here with us in spirit, and to Michael Suka as well, the Assistant Minister of the Treasurer. It's great to have you all with me, but particularly also can I thank CEDA for hosting us today. Thanks very much, Melinda, and congratulations on your appointment, and look forward to working closely with CEDA in the years ahead, as we always have. But to Commissioner Harris, the Chair of the Productivity Commission, can I particularly welcome you today. It's been a real privilege to be working with you and your team, and with Melinda formerly in her previous role, and the work that she did particularly on the data report earlier. Even though it was outstanding work, and that feeds into today's report. But Peter, well done to you and your team. I've been keeping the PC pretty busy over the last couple of years, and the quality of the work and the standard of the professionalism has more than stood up to the task. So well done, Peter, and I'm very pleased to be here to be launching your report today. Almost a decade after the GFC hit, a brighter picture is now emerging for the global and domestic economy, providing evidence of the better days ahead. Over the past 12 months, 371,500 Australians got a job, the strongest jobs growth since before the global financial crisis. 12 months of consecutive jobs growth, the end of September, is the best result in consecutive jobs performance in over 23 years. Annual jobs growth is now running at over 3% through the year, 15 times greater than it was in 2013 when the coalition government was first elected. Since then, 825,000 jobs have been created, and almost two-thirds of those jobs have been secured in just the last 2 years. And the performance on full-time jobs has been even better. In the past 12 months, 315,900 jobs, 315,900 full-time jobs were created. That is the strongest growth in full-time jobs in the almost 40 years since records have been kept, the strongest on record. Hours worked has also increased. The rate of growth in hours, the best in almost 7 years. These results recently led Chris Richardson from Deloitte Access Economics to conclude that Australian job growth is a think of beauty. His words, but happy to quote them. Business conditions are also at the highest level since 2008, and firms are beginning to ramp up their investment and hire more workers, shrugging off the economic funk that has clouded their outlook since the GFC and the end of the mining investment boom. And while there is record jobs growth, which is good news for Australia, and the unemployment rate has fallen by more than half a percentage point over the last couple of years, there is still slack in the labour market. Inflation expectations also remain low, and wages are continuing to adjust from the impact of the mining investment boom. During the mining boom, wages growth ran well ahead of productivity growth, and the movement in producer and consumer wages split apart, as you can see from the chart. The windfall gains of higher commodity prices meant firms could sell their output at much higher prices, but at the same time, consumer prices did not increase nearly as rapidly, in part because of a higher Australian dollar. Now, this meant people were able to buy more than they could previously when their wages were hardwired to their own productivity. Now, in its wake, wages growth has pushed sideways from this period of time, in part giving us an explanation of why we're feeling the sluggish wage growth that we have in recent times. Wages have only grown at a subdued 1.9% through the year to the June quarter. That's the slowest annual growth in at least 20 years. And our challenge is now not just to create more jobs, which we're doing, but as I outlined in this year's budget, better paid jobs as well. And there is reason to be optimistic, as Deloitte Economics also observed. Profits are up, jobs are up, and the next train to leave the station will be wages, they said. The job gains that have already occurred light the path for the turn in wage gains, was the conclusion of their report. This assessment is shared by the government and underpins the better days ahead outlook presented in this year's budget. But we cannot be complacent. Spare capacity in the labour market must continue to reduce and inflation expectations recalibrated. Both Treasury and the RBA expect inflation to move back towards the midpoint of the targeted range of around 2.5% in 2018-19. But for wages to increase, we must also increase business investment and drive a new wave of productivity growth. That's what's needed to lift wages. Deepening our capital stock through investment contributed 0.9 percentage points to our long-run productivity growth of around 1.6%. And this is supported by data from the Business Longitudinal Analysis Data Environment, I'll just call it BLADE from here on in, which shows that businesses with more capital per worker pay higher average real wages. It also shows that real wages are higher for businesses with higher labour productivity, and that workers at the businesses that have the highest productivity have the fastest growth in real wages. Now, this is why the Turnbull government is seeking to extend the tax cuts we have already legislated for businesses up to $50 million to all businesses. The Treasury modelling confirms that such policies will deliver a boost to before-tax real wages of up to 1.2%. Increased investment equals higher wages because it lifts productivity by deepening the capital invested in our workforce. It's not the theory, it's the lived experience, and we can rely on it again. This has become an urgent matter when it comes to taxes, given the more recent moves by the United Kingdom, already below our rate, France, who's going to 25% on a very similar glide path to what we have proposed, and the US, who have also announced their intention to get to 20%. We risk Australian businesses and Australian wages because we can become stranded on an uncompetitive tax island if we fail to respond and act accordingly. It's also why, that is to increase in business investment, we've committed a $75 billion National Infrastructure Agenda fund. And that is already impacting our economy, and we saw that in the national accounts at the end of the June quarter, with growth in public investment approaching almost 9%. How, again, all of this will not be enough. We must also get more out of the investments that have already been made, otherwise known as multi-factor productivity. In the first term of the Howard government, multi-factor productivity growth was adding 3% to total labour productivity growth. It has only contributed 0.7% on average over the past 5 years. So all up, if we only maintain the rate of labour productivity growth we have seen over the past 5 years, it will not be enough to offset the slowdown in the growth of our workforce courtesy of our ageing population. It's estimated by the Commission we need labour productivity growth of around 2.5% to maintain the growth in our living standards. Anything less than that, then we'll see those living standards erode. So that's why a year ago I tasked Peter and the Productivity Commission to undertake the first of what will be a series of 5 yearly reviews into boosting Australia's productivity as a sister publication to the Intergenerational Report. The recommendation for these things to be done had been made earlier and rejected by our political opponents. I would call on them today, regardless of the political future, that they would see 5 yearly reviews by the Productivity Commission of Productivity to be a permanent fixture in our policy landscape. And I should suggest that they should move quickly to support that. It works as a sister publication to the Intergenerational Report and provides the guardrails, if you like, for economic policy in this country. And not just for the Commonwealth Government, but for state and territory governments as well. We must set a discipline for continually scrutinising our productivity agenda. And that's why today I am pleased to be releasing the first of those 5 yearly reports. And I look forward to there being many more. I don't know if Peter's too keen to write another 10, but he's certainly done an excellent job in producing the first of these and championing the idea that this should be part of our economic policy landscape. The report seeks to provide a direction rather than a specific to-do list for governments to immediately achieve and then be forced into the usual Canberra game of ruling in and ruling out. They conclude that no one change is sufficient to address all of these issues. The report also states, I think wisely, the Commission has deliberately floated ideas that cannot always be implemented immediately, but where preparation and further testing is needed for fruition. The report provides a roadmap to higher living standards that should be owned, evolved and progressed by all levels of government and the Australian people over many years. These are the views and observations of the Commission. This report is not from the government, but is produced for all governments, state and federal, and I'd say local as well. Similar productivity agendas from the 1990s were crucial to lifting our productivity. The changes that were made then overhauled our old economy regulation, trade liberalisation, reductions in tariffs, widespread reform to capital markets, sale of government assets, changes to labour markets, competition and tax reform, and better targeting of macroeconomic policy. These changes did bring about a new generation of prosperity for Australians. There was a lot of low-hanging fruit back then. And as Professor Hilmer, one of the architects of that reform era, mentioned and reflected recently, back then, reform was easier to achieve. Back then, the burning platform provided by the early 1990s recession focused the debate and forced greater bipartisanship than we see today. We are thankfully no longer standing on a burning platform, and nor should we wish for one. When you stand on a burning platform, people get burnt. Fairly obvious statement. But I do note that there are some who think they want to impose a burning platform on Australia so they can wake up to themselves. I'm pleased that my children have grown up in an Australia that have never known a recession. I think that's one of Australia's greatest achievements. I think that's what those who designed early reforms earnestly hope for. And I never want to see us go back there again. We are thankfully no longer standing on a burning platform. The price of a generation of Australians growing up without ever having known a recession is that reform now does come more stubbornly and incrementally. We also need to understand that many Australians are now far more sceptical of change. Whenever governments mention the words reform or productivity, they get nervous, they get a twitch. They've seen this movie before. Unlike the last time, when economic reform was a mystery to most as they proceeded. This time around, Australians are more alive to the costs as well as the benefits of reform. Plus, the economic and political bandwidth available for change is narrower than it once was, made more difficult by, frankly, the binary way in which change is viewed and, sadly, exploited. Who are the winners? Who are the losers? Where can I find the conflict to write about? The Commission in this report has sought to bring the agenda up to date and ensure it is aligned with where our economy is today and where it is headed. The world is getting more complicated and more connected at the same time. The report references the cloud, the Internet of Things, Google Chrome, social media apps, 3D printing, drones, machine learning, gene technologies, robotics, as new on the scene or exponentially advanced since previous agendas were crafted. But the Commission also highlights the fact that despite these developments, the gains in productivity from technical change appear to be diminishing. We are no longer having a mining boom also to fuel our tanks going forward. And of course, we have the prospect of an ageing population firmly in our headlights. People, fewer of them, of working age, will have to support a growing number of people who have left the workforce. The PC's first five-yearly review seeks to make sense of this and provide some direction. The new path we are encouraged to embark upon is signposted by a series of key insights, pointing to the need for, amongst other things, more integrated and patient-centred healthcare to create more healthy workers, a more proactive education system that supports better teaching to create more proficient, more resilient and more adaptive workers, and more functional cities that do not choke our economy. The Commission also continues its advocacy for more efficient government delivery of non-market services. Recognise government performance is critical for productivity with our economy now so dominated by services. As the biggest provider and regulator of these services, government cannot be the weakest link in the chain. And they continue their advocacy for stronger, more efficient and more competitive market systems. Like the Harper Review before them, the Commission argues that this should be done by placing the customer at the apex of our economy, not the firm or any other service provider, and certainly not government. Observing that user needs are often not given priority, there is therefore strong scope to empower people so that their needs, not those of service providers, are the key focus. The system is for people, not the other way around. The Turnbull government has already intuitively moved in all of these directions. What I've held up here is just one of a very large set of reports. Some 1,200 plus pages, including 16 supporting and working papers, of which I'd commend them all to you. We do not have time to address all of that, you'll be pleased to know today, in this presentation. So I just want to, in the time we have remaining, highlight some of the key areas that have caught my attention in looking at this report. We have the third highest life expectancy in the OECD at 82.8 years, just almost 83. But also spend the most years in health. An entire decade on average is spent on the sickbed. If we had the same level of healthy life expectancy as Singapore, Australians would on average live 2.6 years longer. We've reduced smoking and car accident deaths, but we have one of the highest obesity rates in the world. We have decreasing rates of disability, but 17.5% of Australians have mental or behavioural problems, and we have a suicide rate that is double the rate of the best performing countries. The PC notes that successful prevention of such mental or behavioural problems can boost labour force participation by up to 26 percentage points. To answer the conundrums that exist in those statistics, we must consider our own health and the effectiveness of our health system. Improving the health of Australians is not just about enhancing our quality of life, it's an economic growth strategy. Healthy and happy people are naturally more productive people. They are more likely to be out looking for a job, more likely to be free of dependency on welfare, and more likely to be earning higher wages. Health is a genuine wealth enabler. In contrast, poor health can be a handbrake on labour supply in the economy, lowering the standard of living for all Australians. While our health system is the envy of much of the world, there are some clear fault lines the Commission suggests. This may be both holding back our march forward to better health and therefore impeding on our productivity. Less than 20% of Australians' GPs are told when one of their patients has been seen in an emergency department. That compares to 68% in the Netherlands and 56% in New Zealand. The pathway of patient care in Australia is all too often fragmented and plagued by poor or non-existent communication between different parts of the health system. This veil of ignorance, where a doctor may not even be aware of significant health issues affecting their patient, can slow down the process of care, put the patient at risk, and lead to unnecessary procedures being performed often at taxpayers' expense, needlessly. The narrative of the findings of the report centre on the lack of integration and information sharing in the health sector, arguing that greater cohesion between hospitals, GPs, specialists, administration and community health clinics would ensure patients receive the best care at the lowest cost. It means teamwork to deliver care. Teamwork to deliver care and sharing knowledge about each patient in the system using a system-wide approach to not only manage chronic illnesses but prevent them. Prevention, as always, is better than a cure. The Commission also decries the waste that exists in the system and the unnecessary procedures that still take place despite evidence that the likely benefit to the patient is nil. More than 200 million could be saved every year by reducing knee arthroscopies alone, that research shows have little benefit in most cases. At the core of the Commission's recommendations on health is a clever play on words borrowed from US author Eric Topol. The patient will see you now. Making the patient the centre of care, improving the care of the patient through all parts of the health system and ensuring there is a teamwork approach to their care. The Turnbull government has already recognised this critical need to coordinate health service with our Health Care Homes trial, which began earlier this month. These 200 practices, when fully rolled out, will focus on the holistic care of patient, tailoring a care plan that addresses all their current health concerns across all parts of the health system and working to prevent further illness. GPs and nurses will act as healthcare navigators, serving the patient via a standard visit, a video conference call, and other specialists, a home visit, or even an SMS reminder, putting the patient at the centre of care. The trial uses a blended system of payments that encourages GPs to provide broad health care. Often just picking up a phone may be all that is required to help patients along their health journey, rather than spending hours every year in waiting rooms reading old magazines, which can be a clear drag on productivity, not just on time, but on intellect. Apologies to New Idea. A one-year trial of telehealth, only joking. It's a great publication. Where was I? Often just picking up a phone, as I said. So a one-year trial of telehealth conducted by the CSIRO saw a 45% reduction in MBS spending, a 25% reduction in PBS spending, a 50% reduction in hospitalisation, and a 40% reduction in deaths just by delivering care over the phone. Data sharing remains the system's Achilles heel, and the predominant reason why communication through the system from emergency departments to your local GP remains poor. Or as the PC report puts it, discovering information about a patient is akin to pinning the tail on the donkey. In 2012, I was quite surprised by this one. Only 37% of specialists and 22% of surgeons use computers. It's 2017, compared to 96% of all GPs. It's awfully hard to collect and share data when they're still using fax machines. This is why the Turnbull government's opt-out My Health Record platform will come into its own, giving practitioners and patients immediate access to records to improve their care and drill down on the specifics. The Commission estimates the economic benefits from a health system reboot could be worth up to $200 billion over the next 20 years. This is not about allocating more resources or conversely, cutting health budgets. Not about that. It's about doing more with the investment we're making in health, the investment that we've already made, doing things smarter, serving the patient, not the system, and ensuring our increasing longevity is matched with a quality of life. In 2014, more than 26% of university students had not completed their degree program within 9 years of commencing. Short-term attrition rates have risen from 12.5% in 2009 to 15.2% in 2014. To make matters worse, unemployment amongst university graduates has surged from 9% in 2009 to 20.5% in 2016. Over a quarter of recent graduates have jobs that don't match up with their degree. The strength of our future workforce will be determined by the choices we make today to rearm and refocus our education system, and much is being done. Professions come and professions go, as technological change and an ageing population create new demand and new opportunities. This process has been accelerated by globalisation, technological change and market disruptions like the shared economy. The Commission makes the important observation that technology adoption, use and diffusion, the long-run drivers of productivity, require people with the right skills. This means that not only does skills development protect employees from these disruptions, but it acts as an accelerator for the benefits that flow from these disruptions to our economy and our living standards when we get it right. That is, it helps create more and better paid jobs. That's what productivity is, more and better paid jobs. That's why we pursue it. This requires a shift in how we approach education, placing more of an emphasis on meeting the needs of our future jobs market, building a supply chain in preparation for jobs where there is currently little demand. A bit like the Harbour Bridge when it was first built. But just like in health, the Commission pinpoints some fundamental flaws that are holding us back from realising our potential. The Commission claims our school results are stagnating. Our vet system isn't delivering the type of employees that employers want, and we have a university system that is more preoccupied with publishing than teaching. It recommends boosting salaries in subject areas where there are teacher shortages to attract higher calibre people to stop teachers from teaching out of their field, like the 30% of high school IT teachers who have never studied the subject. It recommends creating a graduated assessment system that measures the proficiency of vet students rather than straight competency, and creating a fair, credential, embracing, massive open online courses that lower the cost of education and make learning more accessible, and embracing the disruption. The Commission argues that universities are too focused on publishing research, giving the career prospects of lecturers depend more on their publishing resume than their teaching record. This is an upside-down world. Universities are about creating knowledge for our society, but they are also at least as much about learning and the transference of that knowledge to eager and hungry students. Thanks to the financial windfall of attracting foreign students, universities can become distracted with boosting their international rankings that are narrowly based on their research capabilities. The Commission calls it a gladiatorial obsession. Hire the best researchers, increase your ranking, and the cashed-up foreign students will follow. There appears insufficient incentive to improve teaching standards, no data to measure the teaching strength of universities, and no accountability for how successful students are at getting jobs when they walk out the front gates. One way to realign the incentives, the Commission notes, would be to give universities some real skin in the game. Funding that is linked to the success of their students, not their research findings. This is something that Turnbull government sought to address in this year's budget, announcing plans to link 7.5% of funding to universities on their performance. Employers are looking for graduates who are skillful, proficient, not just competent. It doesn't matter if you can perform a task as your school certificate or degree says so. It matters how well you can perform that task. Determining the difference has often been difficult for employers, and they have too often been disappointed. There must be accountability built into the university and vet systems to ensure students are prepared for the workforce of tomorrow. In 2016-17 budget, I announced a range of initiatives to improve teacher quality, including linking teacher salary progression to classroom impact, rather than just how long they have been in the staff room. Our recent performance in the OECD's PISA test showed we have a growing share of lower performers and absolute falls in average scientific reading and mathematical ability. Alarmingly, that landmark test showed that young Australians may be less capable than teenagers of the same age 15 years ago, which is an economic problem as much as it is a social problem. The spotlight naturally falls on how we are teaching our school kids and how we task such an important job. Our recently legislated Gonski 2.0 schools funding package will see an extra $23 billion poured into the schools over the next decade. Clearly cannot be argued that funding is the problem. It's not just about money we are kicking out the door with no accountability. It's transparent, consistent and needs-based funding that we are now delivering. And just to back that in, we have the Gonski 2.0 review to achieve educational excellence in Australian schools. The even more important task, which will provide advice on how schools can best allocate these additional needs-based resources to achieve better results. We have also strengthened course accreditation standards to ensure teachers enter the classroom prepared to have an immediate impact on student learning, in addition to the rollout of performance assessments for new teachers graduating from 2018. And we have taken action now to reset our VET scheme, with our VET student loans program, which consigned Labor's VET fee help scheme, thankfully, to the history books. Students can start to rebuild their trust in vocational education, and taxpayers can rebuild trust to ensure that their money isn't being rorted by those previous Labor schemes. In the budget, I also announced our new Skilling Australians Fund, a major commitment of $1.5 billion that we match with funding from the states to support up to 300 apprenticeships and traineeships. All of these measures are about building the workforce of tomorrow. The Commission estimates that the potential productivity gains we can get from getting our cities functioning better is about $29 billion of increase in our GDP. Around 80% of Australia's GDP is produced in cities, and 40% in Australia's two largest, Sydney and Melbourne. By the time we reach 2050, almost 11 million extra people will be squeezed into our capital cities. Now, I should note that these facts are not intended to diminish the relevance of regional Australia, and I don't believe that's the intention of the Commission at all. They're doing some very good work on regional Australia and the disparities in regional Australia. If anything, given the high level of urbanisation in Australia, it actually highlights the fact that Australia's regions actually punch well above their weight for our economy. That said, the huge weight of our cities means that if we get them wrong, it costs all Australians. But if we get it right, currently, our cities compare favourably with global peers, But there are growing strains, particularly on our roads and public transport, which has a material effect on our productivity. The social costs of congestion in our capital cities will grow from $18.7 billion in 14-15 to at least $31.4 billion by 2030. The Commission highlights better planning and building major infrastructure as a significant driver of productivity, but only if we get it right and it improves the quality of people's lives. Many of the recommendations have been recognised already by the Turnbull Government. The Housing Affordability Plan and reforms to state housing agreements announced in this year's budget require the establishment of housing strategies that will better match supply and demand in the future in return for those funds, which include and should include reform of planning and zoning systems. This is backed up by a small business red tape reduction fund that is incentivising state governments to reduce regulation, including in these areas which congest our cities. Work on infrastructure reforms is also underway as part of the Turnbull Government's Smart Cities Plan. Our record $75 billion commitment to infrastructure will be wisely spent, with the government staying actively involved as an investor. The establishment of our new Infrastructure and Projects Financing Agency will assist the government to make and implement the right choices on infrastructure and how we use taxpayers' money in the smartest way possible, drawing previously and adding to the work of Infrastructure Australia. A 10% reduction in the cost of delivering infrastructure would save $2.9 billion a year. While acknowledging the importance of public transport, the Commission also urges governments to maintain a strong focus on roads. To pay for the upkeep and construction of our roads, motorists currently pay, on average, around $1,300 every year to drive a car in this country. They're already paying those costs now, courtesy of rego, fuel excise and various state taxes. Now, while that revenue is enough to cover the funding requirements now, time is ticking away, and revenue raised from fuel excise is falling as fuel efficiency, electric cars and the popularity of Uber is rising. The Commission proposes a hypothecated funding model built around demand where drivers are charged for how much they use our roads and at what times. Would it be more efficient and lead to more investment in roads? Well, the Commission thinks so, estimating a permanent increase to annual GDP of some $20 billion. A lot for the Commonwealth and states and territories to reflect on as they consider these issues. Our government, particularly through Urban Infrastructure Minister Paul Fletcher, is discussing these very issues with the states and industry to evaluate the merits of how best to fund and deliver the roads Australians will need in the future. And the Commonwealth and the states are proceeding cautiously, but I think highly consultatively. So this is important information for that discussion. Now, the Commission is right to conclude that improving the efficiency of our markets takes us closer to peak productivity. They are also right to highlight that, in particular, the costs of getting the energy system wrong are too large to contemplate, which is why households and businesses are paying too much now and why this needs to change now. The PC rightly backs in their earlier proposals on data reforms, quoting annual benefits of $5.5 billion while pointing to $1.9 billion in benefits in reforms to intellectual property. Here the Turnbull Government has substantial runs on the board. Over the course of this year, we have rolled out a comprehensive energy policy that now clearly addresses costly faults in the system and in an enduring way. Our energy plan will deliver more reliable energy at a lower cost to households and business while still meeting our responsible environmental obligations. Our comprehensive energy policy delivers on the Commission's demand for government to provide certainty, set clear policy direction, let the expert bodies deliver, as well as removing moratoriums on bans on gas exploration that have slowed supply and pushed up prices, rather than deal with each of these cases on their merits. The Commission rightly prioritises fixing the energy mess, they say, and we are fixing it. In the Government's National Energy Guarantee announced last week, we have delivered the investment certainty that the sector has been crying out for and was confirmed by the Australian Industry Group, the Australian Chamber of Commerce and the Business Council of Australia. We have given energy retailers clear rules on how they would need to purchase their electricity, a minimum amount of reliable energy from traditional sources and a minimum amount from low emissions energy. The rest, well, whatever is the cheapest source, thanks to the efficiency of markets. Importantly, as the Commission suggests with great foresight, this is a plan recommended by the Energy Security Board, a COAG-appointed independent body of experts that have no ideological allegiance, they have no truck in the climate wars, but merely a mandate to put forward the best solution based on their extensive experience. We are also well advanced in implementing policies that support the direction of the recommendation to create an environment more conducive to innovation and giving consumers rights over their data. The Turnbull government has been methodically positioning Australia to be a lead fintech hub in the Asia Pacific, leading the world in payment innovations, regtech and blockchain. Our Fintech Agenda, which includes a regulatory sandbox, which the exposure draft legislation has released today, give entrepreneurs and businesses a safe place to trial innovative platforms. And we are building on the government's $1.1 billion National Innovation and Science Agenda. Governments can often be caught napping on innovation and have to scramble to either facilitate or regulate innovation sectors. We have been getting on the front foot. Now, finally, you'll be pleased to know, it is pleasing. It's a big report. It is pleasing that the Commission notes that Australian governments perform relatively well by OECD standards. That is welcome news. We can be very hard on ourselves as Australians, and we should be. That's why we perform so well. But it is always true, as a consequence, that governments must always seek to do better. The Commission is principally saying that as a federation we need to work together better. We need to play nice, including on securing productivity gains. The fundamental position flows through to the suggestion for ensuring greater fiscal discipline by aligning revenue raising with accountabilities for expenditure and having even clearer and even more transparent fiscal processes. The Commission also raised regrets about the need for the Commonwealth to have to buy reform from the states and the evergreen need for better data to inform and keep state Commonwealth programs focused. These issues are not new and they do remain frustrating. More directly, the Turnbull government has been demonstrating our effectiveness through successfully legislating our agenda, keeping our fiscal discipline to maintain a prudent and consistent path back to budget balance projected for 2020-21, and the broad strategy of strengthening our regulators to ensure markets are both effective, strong and they're fair. Since elected last year, re-elected I should say, the Turnbull government has passed 169 pieces of legislation. We've made $100 billion of budget repair measures in 3 years, and we've reduced average real growth in government expenditure to below 2%. We have taken strong action to ensure our banking and financial system is unquestionably strong, but also unquestionably fair, accountable and competitive. And we're also well served by the ACCC and the AER, who recently provided an invaluable insight into the energy market with our new Energy Security Board, being a prime example of COAG cooperation, which in its short life has had a sizable impact. So we're at the crossroads, as always. The PC has shown us a path to update our national productivity agenda to ensure we not only maintain our living standards, but we lift them. This is not the sole responsibility of the Commonwealth Government. Experience shows that sustained growth in productivity is reliant upon governments across the Federation working together, not going it alone. The Commission makes this point crystal clear, urging reform of COAG and the development of a national reform agenda. This week I'll be sitting down with State Treasurers at our Council of Federal Financial Relations meeting on Friday. State Treasurers will have the opportunity to hear directly from Peter and his team at the Productivity Commission about the benefits of working together to boost Australians' living standards, not just in their own states, but in all states and territories across the Federation. In order to boost Australians' living standards, it's critical that all levels of governments work together across partisan lines in the interests of all Australians and the nation as a whole. The National Energy Guarantee would be a great way to confirm the wisdom of what the Commission has recommended by us all committing to that. And I particularly welcome the fact that today the Business Council of Australia has written to all state and territory governments urging them to get on board. That's why I'm hopeful my state counterparts will give Peter Harris a good hearing on Friday, and I'm looking forward to a good discussion with them as always. The first of many, ideally one that can continue constructively until the next productivity report in 5 years' time. Thank you for your patient attention.